Okay, this is a video interview of Rick MacPherson, our fourth commander of
I think I was
American
fourth,
Legion.
you're right, fourth commander, yeah.
And he's going to give a speech or dissertation on what he went through when he joined the services and what he did in the services and more, whatever is on the paper here.
Okay, well, I'll start with what was on the agenda and what our connection to Anderson Island is. My wife and I were living in Renton, Washington at the time, and decided we wanted a lake place, spend the weekends and short vacations and such. So we looked at probably 20 or 30 freshwater lakes all the way from the coast over to Lake Wenatchee, Moses Lake, Coeur d'Alene, and all that, and trying to get a feel for the market and such. And we saw in the paper somebody advertising lakefront property on Lake Josephine. That was all it said. So we took a little bit of research to figure out that that was on Anderson Island. We came out here, looked at the property, liked the island, liked the ferry, believe it or not, and just bought this lot here on Lake Josephine. And it's again, it was intended to be a weekend place, turned into a full-time place. We had the house built in 1993, lived out here just part-time till 2007, and then we've been living out here full-time since then. To the service connection, I was born in Leavenworth, Washington, but my family moved to Arizona when I was like in the second grade, so I pretty much grew up down there in Scottsdale. Never really cared much for the place, never adjusted to the heat. Went through high school, graduated, started to go to community college, really wasn't getting much out of it or making a connection, so I quit community college, started working full-time, and that was back when the draft was going. So I graduated high school in '70, and this was like in '71 or something. And I remember at work I called up to find out what my draft number was. They were drawing them out of a hat or whatever it was, and I remember distinctly the lady said, "What day were you born?" I said, "November 4th, and she paused, she goes, "I'm so sorry, your number is 39. And they were drafting up into the low 100s, and the war was still going strong, and obviously I was going to go. Didn't much like the idea of going from a hot place to a hot and humid place, so I decided to enlist in the Navy. Why the Navy? My dad had some connection. I had some uncles that were in the Navy, and it just sounded more appealing than crawling around in the mud. So joined the service, went to boot camp in San Diego. Did pretty well in the testing phase, so I was got not exactly my choice of what I wanted to do for A school. I wanted to be a photographer's mate. There were no openings in that, so my number 2 was what they called at the time photo intelligence, and got that assignment. Went to an A school in Denver, Colorado, Lowry Air Force Base, which is, I believe, where most, if not all, of the photo intelligence training took place. There were also, I remember, a lot of officers from other countries there. I remember seeing Germans and Vietnamese officers, all of them, I presumably getting trained in this same thing. So the idea was that they trained us to read aerial film, again, before computers, before database images, and so we would, using light tables and, believe it or not, slide rules, didn't have calculators at the time, would learn to identify and locate various ships, submarines, planes, targets, SAM sites, any of that kind of stuff. And I did well in A school, so when I think it was a 4-month A school winter in Denver, which was a real treat. And I put in for a VP squadron. It's a anti-submarine Navy squadrons. They fly P-3 Orions, 4 propeller jobs. And they sent me to Moffett Air Force Base, or excuse me, Moffett Naval Air Station in the south end of the San Francisco Bay, Moffett Field. And so I moved there, had a great situation. I was the only PT, photo intelligence guy, in the squadron. I didn't stay in duty. There was no duty rotation for me, so anytime after 5 or the weekends was my time. I had a motorcycle. I spent my weekends riding the hills up around San Francisco back before it got crazy and crowded. Just living the life. And then in about November, December, I think it was of 71, I got new orders. They sent me down to the USS Constellation aircraft carrier CVA 64, stationed in San Diego. And they were getting ready to head for Vietnam. So they didn't care what I thought about the reassignment. They said, be down there. I was there. Totally different world. The ship was in the final stages of being supplied and such for the trip to Vietnam. Got on the ship, went over there. On the way over, we were involved in identifying and more intelligence aspects on the Tu-95 Bears, the Russian bombers that always played games of trying to find us when they knew we were coming, they just didn't know where. So got over there, got exposure to Olongapo in the Philippines, which was a real Wild West show back when the war was going on. Also as QB Point or Subic Bay in the Philippines. So anyway, then we took off for the war, and shortly after we got on station, or maybe a little bit before, the war was over. They called an armistice or peace, whatever it was. And so we were no longer involved with Vietnam. However, we were still sending planes loaded with bombs and such off the carrier, and they would come back with holes in them, and the bombs are no longer there. So they were going into Laos and I believe Cambodia at the time, fighting the sort of the post-war effort against that area. Eventually that tapered down. Excuse me. One of the things I do remember on the carrier was we were called over the 1MC, everybody on the ship, and they said, hey, if you're interested, you can go topside. There's a group of C-41 transport planes that are taking the prisoners of war from Hanoi to the Philippines. So I made an effort to go up there and watch the 141s go over, and the guys coming home. So that somehow stuck with me as being real impressive. Did a 9-month cruise that time, a lot of time over Yankee Station, which was off of North Vietnam, Dixie Station off of South Vietnam, flying patrols. I didn't fly myself. I had a nice air-conditioned, comfortable office space on the carrier. Anyway, just going through the routines, did Liberty in Hong Kong, Singapore. Anyway, it was somewhat uneventful. We had a few occasions. I remember once we were off of Yankee Station up north, and they were doing some kind of maintenance on the ship. We were dead in the water off the coast, quite a ways off the coast, but anyway, they detected a large aircraft coming towards our ship, and things get real hectic real quick. The ship going, a 95,000-ton aircraft carrier, going from a dead stop to enough speed to try and get wind over the deck so they could launch the fighter planes. Anyway, it was kind of crazy. Turned out it was I believe a Canadian airliner that didn't go through the proper protocol to let us know that they were coming. So it turned out to be a non-event, but nevertheless, you don't know it at the time. Anyway, did the 9-month cruise, came back to San Diego, was there for 6-8 months, something like that. I forget my timeline here. But anyway, it was time to go again. This time, since there was no real aerial film to interpret, no tactical aerial film, I should say, so they weren't flying over the country. We weren't looking for truck parks and SAM sites in any aircraft emplacements. We were concerned with something else, and excuse me, our intelligence officer decided that he wanted to get into a different level of aerial film. So we started getting some SR-71 Blackbird film. And remember at the time they told us, you never say the word Blackbird, you never say SR-71. This is a very secret plane. Don't tell anybody. And it was interesting because they made a special room for us within the intelligence center, and I had to. Those of us who could go in there had top secret clearances versus most of the other guys had secret clearances, so you couldn't even tell your buddies, what are you doing in there? What's going on in there? And you said, no, can't tell you. Also, we got some satellite film, they call it Keyhole. It was a KH-11, I think, it was a satellite. Again, to show you how low tech it was. These were the satellites where they would go up and take pictures, and they would eject a film canister, would come down through the sky on a parachute, and they'd have, I think it was a C-130 with these big arms in it, and they would literally snag it out of the midair and take the film and develop it. And we weren't the first ones to see it, but we had different things that we were looking for. The other thing that we dealt with was Russian intelligence trawlers. They call them trawlers. They looked like trawlers from a long distance, but they were intelligent ships. They had a lot of antennas and such on them, and they would trail us pretty much wherever we went. I'd go up in a helicopter once in a while and we'd take pictures of them and identify the masts and the radars and such, trying to figure out what their capabilities were. Also, I got an assignment to what we call the OSAC, which is the Ocean Surveillance Analytical Center. And our job was to project and identify ships that we saw along the way. Most of them civilian ships, tankers, bulk ore carriers, those kind of things. But every once in a while there would be a destroyer or something like that, and or Russian or Chinese or something. So anyway, that was part of the job. I spent a lot of time up on the signal bridge, which is really the highest deck on the island of the carrier above where the captain is. It's way up there, and with these big, like 40 power binoculars, watching the horizon, looking for ships coming over. Also, I think that's where I lost a good portion of my hearing, because we would be up there during flight ops. We had Mickey Mouse ears that we could wear for hearing protection, but we also had to talk to each other. And we didn't have the ability to talk over the microphone or anything, so you would take your heads off, your earphones off, and talk to other guys. In the meantime, the F-4 Phantoms and RA-5Cs and A-6s and A-7s were taking off. It was a pretty noisy environment, but anyway, that's what you do. See, that was a 6-month cruise. We did leave the Vietnam coast, went through the Straits of Malacca, I think it's between Malaysia and Indonesia, went over into the Indian Ocean, had pulled liberty in Karachi, Pakistan, which if you ever get a chance, don't go to Karachi. It was a real mess. They tell you you've got 8 hours of liberty, don't eat anything, don't drink anything. The place is hot and nasty and stinks and all this other stuff, and don't bring drugs back. And I had a friend who chose to ignore the latter one, tried to bring back a bunch of pills, I don't know what they were, under the shoelaces of his tennis shoe, and got caught, and we didn't see him for 30 days while he was in the brig. But anyway, we also went in through the Straits of Hormuz into the Persian Gulf. Got to look around. There's really not a lot to see. The carriers don't go real close to the shore, but you just remember it being flat and hot. And, a lot of sea snakes in there. While we were off Pakistan, we did do they call firepower demonstration for the president of Pakistan. So he came out to the ship, and we had our the planes dropping bombs, strafing with the Vulcan cannons, doing high-speed passes, all of this at sea, nothing on land, but pretty impressive. Got to see a RA-5C, which was a reconnaissance plane, but flying by the ship at supersonic speed, at close enough to where you could throw a rock in the intake if you had a mind to do that. So it was pretty impressive. Anyway, that was a 6-month tour. Came back to the States. We did a family relocation. So the ship was going into the yard over in Bremerton, and they try and minimize the relocation expenses by bringing the families on board the ship, and their cars, their personal stuff. It was really interesting to see the hangar deck and the flight deck covered with personal vehicles, and families wandering around the ship. And you've been in this environment for so long, and the smell and the sounds and all this thing are really compartmentalized, that you're on a warship and you're doing Navy stuff. And to see wives and girls and little boys walk around the passageways in curlers, and it was really disconcerting, and trying to figure out, whoa, this is a strange sight. But anyway, came up to Bremerton, ship went in the yard, and as the Navy is wont to do when there's work to be done, they really don't care what your specialty is, you do work. And I stood fire watches, which is just monumentally boring, making sure stuff doesn't catch on fire, and doing shore patrol and those kind of things just to fill the time. During that period we were in Bremerton, I became eligible I fulfilled my 4-year obligation. So at that time I decided I'd rather go to college than do more of this, and end up getting out, enrolling in Edmonds Community College. The weather up here suits me perfectly, and stayed up here. So that was my military career.
What happened after you got out?
Well, I went to college. Really hadn't gained a whole lot in 4 years. Still wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and but again, I was having a good time. I was getting the GI Bill, which most people didn't at the time. I think it was $425. But when you're paying $100 for an apartment, you can live pretty large, single guy, have a nice car and such. And went there for about 1.5 years and decided I wanted to go to the University of Washington. So I applied down there, got accepted, and moved down. I'm not sure it was a great move, in that the classes went from being real easy to being real hard. It's a different environment down there, but it was fine. During my course, I was in college. I met Sandy, who was kind of my wife. She was a flight attendant at the time, and just hit off. Got married before I got out of college, but graduated from there, got my Bachelor of Science, and then entered into the civilian workforce.
Great. Thank you, Rick, for sharing your experience.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to do it.
Thank you.